Okay, so let's move to our keynote presentation today. We're going to talk about elevating security awareness in higher education. Ben McGuire has traveled all the way from Washington, D.C. to be with us today. He's from EAB. We've been a member of EAB for 2 years in the IT forum. We're also a member in the business forum here at Washburn University. I'll let Ben tell you a little bit about EAB and what they do. The only thing I would add at this point is I've seen their presentations before, and they pack a lot of information in them, and they move pretty quick. So for that purpose, if you look in the center of your table, you will see a handout of their presentation, of Ben's presentation today. That's going to help a lot. I encourage you to use that to follow along, take notes, or take it with you so that you have information. It's really good information. That's one reason we invited EAB to come and share information with us. So with that, I'm going to turn over the microphone to Ben. Welcome, and welcome everybody, and we'll get Check 2016 started.
Can anyone hear me? There we go. Maybe I can stand back here.
Okay. Can I turn off this mic? Have we turned off the mic here? Yeah. Okay, try it again.
Sorry about that, everyone. Thank you to Floyd and to Washburn University and for all of you for letting me participate today. Driving in from the airport, driving through Kansas, you can't help but see how passionate and vibrant higher education is in this state, in road signs and billboards and hats and clothes. Everywhere you go, the universities and colleges that are in this room are really a huge part of the culture here. So it's really a privilege and a pleasure to be able to join you for this. Before I get started, I want to give you a little bit of context into EAB and to what we do to give you some perspective into why the presentation will look the way it will. And EAB, or the Education Advisory Board, is a higher education research group in Washington, D.C., as Floyd mentioned. We were launched in 2007, and today we work with about 1,000 colleges and universities across North America and across the world. To put that number into context, about 75–80% of undergrads in the United States actually attended one of our member institutions last fall. So we cover a lot of the education space within the United States. And what we do comes in a few distinct flavors. Our core business is research and insights. We have forums dedicated to the up-at-night challenges of university executives across different areas. I'm here on behalf of the IT forum, but we also have a forum for provosts and academic affairs, for COE and continuing online education, university systems forum, facilities forum, et cetera. We also have a lot of work and investment in technology, specifically in student success. I know some of the institutions in the room will likely have heard of SSC, SSC Campus, SSC Guide. We also do work in data and analytics and in managed services through enrollment as well as advancement. And I've thrown up a few of our current members on the slide. This is just to give you a sense. We really work across the spectrum of higher education, from community colleges, small baccalaureate schools, all the way up to the largest research institutions. And as I mentioned, what we do is work with university executives and their teams on their largest up-at-night challenges. I'm here with the IT forum, and so we provide research and advice for CIOs, IT teams, helping them manage the technology that is familiar in many industries in the higher education space, which is unique and probably uniquely difficult. And when I say best practice research, I mean something fairly particular. What we do is ask our members to tell us what their biggest challenges are. What are your upper night issues? What are the strategic challenges that you've been facing year after year that continue to be tough? And where you feel that change is really an urgent priority right now. We'll boil the ocean as much as we can, try to find everything that's going on inside, outside of industry, narrow it down to a few hundred, then a few dozen practices that we think are innovative, that are effective, and give our members the 12 to 30 practices that we think are newsworthy, that are replicable across different kinds of institutions, and that can really drive change on campus. It's not uncommon, actually, for one of our forum meetings to have an institution set just as diverse as the one in this room, research titans alongside very, very small schools, and we want to make sure that the practices we bring to the space can be effective for all of those kinds of institutions. And I give you that brief background to set up why we ended up tackling education, higher ed security awareness. And it's because, and this probably won't surprise many of you, security is making a lot of headlines, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger priority for IT leaders and for their teams. Security breaches are now making news, mainstream news, in a way that they never have before for higher education. You have more high-profile incidents. I would be shocked if all of you hadn't heard of the University of Maryland in 2014, but there's a lot of small schools that fall into this list, a lot of very large institutions that fall onto this list. And these can be incredibly expensive. When a few journalists tabulated the costs of the promised remediation after the University of Maryland's breach, it looked like about $2.6 million in credit monitoring and close to $20 million if you added up all the promised changes and reforms to the security infrastructure. We're seeing more and more of our members take this seriously, hiring chief information security officers or CISOs, reforming security governance, governance risk and compliance across the university. And we're also seeing a lot more board attention, a lot more strategic thinking about security. This is some interesting survey data that was released fairly recently. They asked security experts in different fields if they briefed the board of directors at their organization on security. And today you can see about 1 in 5 CISOs or heads of security within an organization is actually briefing the board of directors on cybersecurity strategy. Within 3 years, they expect that to be more like 2 in 3. So we have a dramatic shift, or we expect a dramatic shift, in how organizations are treating security. And it's not hard to see why we think that small to medium breaches, as you will often hear, are really a question of when, not a question of if. The data on this slide is from a survey of CISOs from around the world within different industries, and I'll walk you through it briefly. On the y-axis, you have the likelihood of a breach event within the next 2 years, the assumed likelihood. On the x-axis, the number of records that could potentially be exposed. The line that's drawn through the center of the page is where those guesses coalesced, where they averaged out. And I'll start with the good news over on the far right side of the page. The chance of a very large event, a Maryland-style breach, still is thought to be very low. We think that this is going to continue to be relatively rare for institutions. Pretty large incidents, 50,000 records or more, are slightly more likely. Where I want to really focus your attention is on the top left, where minor breaches, 10,000 records or less. Security experts think that for a given organization, you're likely to see a 1 in 5, 1 in 4 chance of a breach of that size within the next 2 years. The question is, why does this matter so much for higher education? After all, we don't necessarily have a lot of the very valuable data that financial firms are worried about. We don't have always the HIPAA data that healthcare organizations are worried about. Where we see the challenge is that higher ed tends to be seen as a data-rich, soft target. And this slide is from a presentation from RSA, which many of you have likely heard of. And they wanted to flip the security ROI question on its head. We have a lot of organizations that try to help schools, try to help different industries calculate the ROI of investing in security. At RSA, they tried to flip that on its head and say, what does the adversary's ROI look like? After all, they don't really care what your investment is or what you're getting out of it. They care what they can get from an attack. And when we look at how this plays out in higher ed, we see where part of the challenge starts to emerge. When it comes to attack value, the data value minus the cost of the attack, higher ed looks like 10 industries in one to a potential attacker. There's banking information. If you have a clinic on campus, there's likely healthcare, HIPAA-protected data. There's tech R&D. There's lots of PII that might not be destroyed year after year. At the same time, success probability is probably relatively higher than in most industries. Higher ed is an industry that's often not prepared, not really sensitized to security. So you have a lot of hard-to-track vulnerabilities. You have research data, email that's differently managed across colleges. You have faculty with servers under their desks. You have mobile devices vendors that might be managed at the unit level. Central IT is not always managing this. They don't even always know all the things that are happening. In addition, we see that higher education tends to carry a higher cost when breaches actually do happen. The data on this slide is from the Ponemon Institute. A quick show of hands. Has anyone ever heard of the Ponemon Institute? They're an interesting group. If you read the Verizon or Raytheon breach reports that come out every year, this is the organization that conducts that research. What they've found over the last few years is that in the education sector, breaches tend to cost a lot more than the average industry. So for higher education, we see that you're paying about $294 per record loss per capita. That is, per individual record, which is exposed during a breach, much higher than the all-industry average of about $200. That's the bad news. The good news is that there are things that can really help. On the right side of the slide, that center line represents the average per capita cost of a breach. At the top, if you have a lost or a stolen device, breaches can cost a lot more, $16 more per record lost. If there's a third party involved, if there are consultants engaged, you see that price start to go up and up. But if you have a CISO appointed, if you have a business continuity plan in place, if you have an incident response plan in place, you see dramatic reductions. And to put these numbers, which may look a little bit small, into context, these are per record variations. And it's not uncommon to have a breach of 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 records. Those small numbers add up very, very quickly. But when we asked our members why they were so focused on security, why this was so urgent for them, they didn't often talk about the direct financial penalties that were associated. They had a little bit of more nebulous idea that the institution's reputation would be at risk. And this is something actually that we hear a lot. We probably had dozens of calls where we heard, if we have a breach, students will stop coming to the university, they won't be able to trust us with their information, they'll go somewhere else and we'll suffer. And we tried to demonstrate that, we tried to quantify that, and all the available data tends to show that when it comes to student enrollments, there's very little risk that we see through cybersecurity breaches. Students appear mostly unfazed by this. On the left side of the slide, this is survey data of institutions that had seen a breach happen within the last year. And they asked those organizations, did you see abnormal customer churn? That is, customer turnover, leaving to go to somewhere else after a breach. We see that higher ed's right near the bottom, relatively unaffected. On the right side, we tried to quantify what reputation might look like. We tracked very, very large breaches. These are 3 breaches within the last decade of at least 195,000 records lost. And then we looked at undergraduate applications after a major breach event. You can see for yourself that there's little to no effect. In fact, if you went by the data alone, you might be led to expect that applications would go up. When we looked at this data, we also looked at yield rates, we looked at the academic strength of the class. For all of the enrollment indicators that our VPs of enrollment management really care about, it doesn't look like student enrollment is at risk during a breach. But there are some other areas on campus where we want to take reputation more seriously. And one of them is in the research enterprise. The schools in the room that do a lot of research will understand this. A lot of agencies and industry partners are really security aware, repeat purchasers. In the first place, federal funding over the last decade has gotten a lot more cumbersome, a lot more competitive. You need to be able to demonstrate encryption, detailed data management plans, secure data transfer. The grant approval rates are down, the total funding is down. And this shift in federal funding has accompanied sort of a sea change in how university research is funded across higher ed. We're relying more and more on private industry partnerships. University of Michigan is a very good example here. In 2013, they lost about $9.6 million in NIH funding, and were able to replace nearly all of that with new industry partnerships. In total, industry partnerships are now about 8% of all sponsored research at University of Michigan. And EAB recently started working with VPs of research, and they're telling us that they're worried that corporate partners are looking for reasons to say no. They're extremely sensitive to what they perceive as threats to their IP, to their own information. They're afraid that if they don't have security and compliance, if they can't get data management down, it'll be grounds to put them out of the running in a very quickly changing funding environment. And there's one final area where we see some interesting risks in terms of reputation from cybersecurity. The slide on the left here will likely be more relevant for our folks from community colleges, from public universities. There was a state flagship school on the Canadian border that recently experienced a spear phishing attack. Spear phishing is a targeted email attempting to embed a program or extract information from a user, tailored to what that user would expect to see in a real email. There was a phishing attack, a spear phishing attack, on the cabinet of a major university. Click here to process your 2% raise. All of you in the room know that that email would never look that way. It would never come to the CBO. Click here to process. But a few people did click in. Their credentials were loaded somewhere else. Their checks were eventually diverted. And it was only 10 people. It was not a huge risk to the institution as a whole. The aftermath is where things got more interesting. They found that in the next round of funding negotiations, when they were talking with the legislative committees that were determining university budgets, there was much more scrutiny. They were looking into security and IT spending across the system. They were asking for more reporting. In general, they were putting more pressure on administrative spending, on administrative funding, because the legislature felt that the university couldn't protect itself. Why should we give you more? The example on the right, or the examples on the right, might be more relevant for private universities, but I think they have context for all of us. I'm actually here, as Floyd mentioned, from Washington, D.C. If you've been following the campaign at all, and if you know how not to follow the campaign, I would appreciate that. You've likely heard a few somewhat derogatory comments about the 1% over the last few months. Whatever you think about the politics there, we think that within higher education fundraising, there could be some truth to the idea that a smaller and smaller share of donors is having a very, very big impact. Between 2006 and 2011, the share of total capital campaign dollars coming from the top 1% of donors, that is the top echelon of fundraisers, went from about 2/3 to about 3/4 of all campaign dollars. When you add in the top 5% of donors, you see that you're getting very, very, very high. And when you rely that heavily upon a very small group of individuals, that comes with a different kind of risk, the risk of individuals getting mad and leaving. And we heard cautionary tales from our friends in advancement, a donor who walked away from an anonymous gift after their anonymity was lost, a device that was lost that had secured donor data on it in an airport. One of my favorite examples, there was a divorce attorney in New York who was trying to hack in to a university's advancement shop to get the details of a planned gift. They felt that the gift was better spent in other ways by the soon-to-be ex-spouse. But the big story here is that as we rely more heavily on this small group of people, the folks in research, the folks in the CBO's office, the folks in advancement likely are going to be some of your biggest allies because their biggest concerns are having more and more to do with research, with security, pardon me. So why is this hard? Why is this so difficult in higher ed? We think that higher ed is uniquely difficult to secure because of its very nature, its openness, its academic freedom, and its shared governance. In the first place, you have a constantly changing user base that's almost unique among industries. You have collaborative researchers going around the globe with their devices. You have new students coming in with 10, 20 connected devices. At the same time, you're profoundly decentralized. You might have hundreds of units that are virtually autonomous when it comes to how they use technology. You have a very wide range of IT literacy. You might have a Luddite professor of classics working right next to a world-class computer scientist. At the same time, IT has very few enforcement mechanisms. You have very few ways to force people to get this done. On the one hand, you're determined to stay this way. You're by design focused on transparency. The bedrock mindset you have tilts toward academic freedom. But this makes you uniquely risky. You're heavily regulated. You have more risk-producing constituencies than almost any other industry. And as a result, we see more than our share of breaches that are really preventable. Problems caused by lax security hygiene, we find, are about twice as prevalent in higher education as they are in other industries. The data on this slide is from a group called the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse. It's a California-based nonprofit that collects publicly reported breaches, tracks the industry that was affected, the number of records that were lost, in an attempt to get information out there and help people understand when their information may have been exposed. And what we see when we take higher education and compare it to all of their industries, we see that areas where simple user errors may be prevalent, and unintended disclosure and hacking and malware tend to be a lot higher in higher education. And what these things have in common is unhygienic behaviors, not patching software, not encrypting emails, downloading programs, clicking on a phishing email. These are the behaviors that tend to cause this. I wanted to give some real-life examples of unintended disclosure and hacking and malware, actually that have happened just in the last few weeks. For hacking and malware, a university in Florida, a university of Central Florida, I believe, recently experienced a pretty large breach when they noticed somebody had accessed a server. About 60,000 records were exposed, and the FBI now has 2 people in custody. That was classified under hacking and malware. In unintended disclosure, Southern New Hampshire University recently saw about 140,000 records exposed when a vendor made a configuration error when they were transferring information and exposed that to the open web. To put 140,000 into context, when I added up all of the students that were currently enrolled at the universities in the room, it was about 145. So if you can imagine every single school, you just lost every single current student. That's the scale of these kinds of breaches. So what has been our approach so far? What has higher ed done to make this better? What we see in general is security as campaign, mass marketing to try to get people practicing hygienic behaviors. And we think that there are probably diminishing returns to this approach. Every year, likely during the month of October, or potentially after a breach event in a relevant industry or nearby, there'll be some kind of campaign that gets kicked off. There'll be security flyers, email reminders, you'll start to make an impact, people will come to events, but at some point you reach saturation. If people aren't internalizing why it matters for them, if you're not educating them why it's relevant to their day-to-day, eventually the communication won't reach everyone, there'll be turnover in staff. Next October, next time this happens, you have to do this all again, but now you need a louder message, you need wackier posters, you need more exciting emails. It's not sustainable. And I wanted to put some real examples up on the screen for all of you. Do you think there are really limitations to treating security awareness like a marketing campaign? These clever-ish cues might catch the eye, but they might not really be educating people. And these are not uncommon. This poster on the left, "Don't fall for the fish stick." What is told instead of "why me"? Don't click on the phishing email, but why should I care? I'm a faculty member, I'm a student, why is this relevant to me? It's coming from IT, not from managers, not leveraging their personal networks. And it's relying on entertainment, on shock value, on ubiquity. Eventually, putting up posters, people are going to stop paying attention. This is from Yale University, university actually that's extremely good at a lot of these things. This is a result of trying to scale as quickly as possible, trying to get information out as quickly as we can. They put a student in a fish costume to go talk to people about the dangers of fishing, so we wonder if there might be an additional risk of dehydration on a hot September day. The question is there a way to do this better? Can we improve the status quo, the campaign mentality of security awareness? A few years ago, some researchers at Syracuse University looked at security behaviors of end users and taxonomized them based on the intent of the individual involved and their expertise in IT, and they categorized them into these 6 different spaces. On the far left, you have truly malicious intent. I want to hurt the university, I want to hurt other people, I'm intentionally breaking in, I'm misusing files in a detrimental way. On the far right, you have people that are secure, that are benevolent. Maybe they're reliably hygienic, they just kind of follow the rules. Maybe they're proactively secure. In the center, we have people who are just unintentionally unsecure. There's nothing bad about their intentions. They're just trying to do their jobs, but the way they're doing it is causing security challenges. And where we think that higher education has the largest opportunity to improve security, and the biggest ROI, is not at the far left, but really in the middle. We think that the vast majority of our campus constituents are making naive mistakes, are tinkering with technology in a way that they're just trying to get things done, but is unsafe. We think that if we can start to migrate people from this zone of unintentional insecurity into reliably hygienic behaviors, That's where higher ed IT can get the most bang for its buck, where you can really leverage your face-to-face time. And if you can start to do that, if you can move people from naive mistakes into reliably hygienic, it means that you can take really valuable staff time and start to devote it to these malicious folks who are relatively rare, relatively expensive to prevent, but are truly dangerous to the institution. And with that, I wanted to share what we think are the 4 big imperatives for elevating security awareness. We think there are 4 big challenges that higher ed IT needs to deal with. First is in hardwiring breach response. Most of our schools, unfortunately, are not really prepared for a breach event in terms of the strategy folks up in the cabinet, all the way down through to faculty. We think that if we can really help campus be secure, be resilient when breaches happen, we can go a lot of the way towards minimizing their cost. I'll talk about incident managers and about time to response tracking. Second big challenge is making risks relevant. There's frankly a very defensible reason that faculty members tend to sort of ignore a lot of the messages that come flying at them about security. It's not clear why it matters to them. If you're not telling them about something that matters for their research niche, for their students, frankly, they have a lot of demands on their time. You have to make it clear why it matters for their day-to-day. I'll talk about board education memos and about unit-level risk profiles. Third is demonstrating vulnerability. We need to be able to show people that it is you right now in this place that is at risk. It has to be vivid, it has to explain, it has to show them very viscerally that this is a vulnerability that matters right now. And finally, the holy grail of security awareness, real incentives. Relatively rare, but can be extremely powerful. I'll talk briefly about breach chargebacks. To begin, I want to go back to 2014 at the University of Maryland, where they saw, as I mentioned, that very, very large breach. A lot of you are probably familiar with some of the details, the collaboration website that was not protected, the data destruction policy that was not followed stringently. What you might not have heard as much about was that the lack of a pre-wired response invited a lot of hasty decisions and a lot of duplicative effort. Essentially, because they didn't have a really hard-wired, pre-wired campus ready to go when a breach happened, they found themselves living in the worst of both worlds. The somewhat chaotic nature of this slide is trying to show that breaches can be very stressful, very chaotic, very wild. Somebody has to contact the local media. Somebody else needs to contact law enforcement. Who's determining the size and scope of damage? Should the general counsel talk to the police? Who's in charge of that? And that question, who's in charge, gets really, really critical. And if you don't know it, you can have some big challenges. In the first place, big decisions can be made far too quickly. You might have somebody promising free credit reports for 10 years, making unprecedented promises just to get people focused. At the University of Maryland, they promised a security audit, a comprehensive audit, top to bottom, of every single IT system in the entire system. They did not necessarily talk to the CIO or the CISO about that before they made that promise. You can imagine huge costs associated with that. They also had multiple revisions of the actual size of the breach in the media. You had multiple individuals that were communicating with different news organizations. Somebody would say 300,000, somebody else would say 2. What ended up happening is they just looked that they weren't prepared. They didn't look professional in the way that they were communicating. At the same time those big decisions were happening too quickly, very routine things happened far too slowly. No one was sure who was in charge of big decisions. One of the things that one of the biggest takeaways from the University of Maryland's breach is know who your crisis vendors are, have that Rolodex on hand at the CIO's desk all the time. The last thing you want to do is have an RFP at midnight while a breach event is happening and the media is at the door. And they were making duplicative law enforcement requests. One of the biggest takeaways, one of the biggest recommendations that schools that have gone through a breach tell us is move away from the foundational practices that you see here. Most of us have classified the information we hold based on its sensitivity. Most of us have defined some escalation pathways. Try to get even faster. Speed is really the name of the game when it comes to breach response. It's going to tie up your most competent, likely your most expensive staff. It's going to require very expensive legal support. It's going to require forensic IT vendors. This is a lesson that's been learned in a lot of other industries, in healthcare especially, because business distraction, living with a breach for months on end, is a matter literally of life and death. We think that we need to be getting even faster, starting to really organize the response and make the processes a lot more efficient. One of the keys is having an incident manager, someone who will be in charge of decisions during a breach event. A single owner, we are told, reduces the lag time that you see accessing experts and notifying stakeholders. And a breach response leader is not necessarily someone very senior. It's sometimes seen as like a field promotion for a junior IT person. What we see is that they have 6 core responsibilities. The first is to be available 24/7. They need to drop everything to focus on the incident. And this helps us get by a strange problem that you see during breach events. When you have people working from 10 a.m. until 8 p.m., documenting process and getting things done, when it switches over to the night shift, if there's not someone to document and make sure that all that information is shared, they're likely going to do a lot of the same things again. You're going to lose very, very valuable time right when you need to be getting after it. This person is responsible for damage assessment, start to estimate the value of the compromised data, if systems need to be shut down, if there's a criminal investigation that needs to be underway. They're responsible for bringing up the response team. Often for smaller breaches, this will be a very small group of desktop network staff, but when it starts to get bigger, it needs to involve the counsel's office. If there are employees involved, HR should be involved. If there are HIPAA, FERPA, PCI data, your compliance officer will likely need to be in the room. And finally, communications, once you start to see that victims need to be notified. This person is responsible for putting together stakeholder notifications, need-to-know leadership updates, as well as notification for victims and the media. They're responsible for evidence collection, starting the case file and documenting key decisions that were made. And finally, and I think this could be one of the most important, starting the post-mortem analysis. As I mentioned, breaches are a question of when, not if. They're going to happen again and again. Documenting the process that went on, understanding the root cause, and updating standards and procedures is really, really critical to making us more efficient. And when it comes to efficiency, one of the best practices that we've seen across industries is time to response tracking. And what we're talking about here is documenting process performance across 4 key areas to streamline our future response. This is a practice we've seen more prevalent in private sector firms when they have larger IT teams, but I've seen this at a public flagship out west, as well as at a small baccalaureate college in Pennsylvania. What they're doing is mapping the time it takes to identify that a breach has occurred, the time it takes to know what happened, what was the root cause of the breach, time it takes to fix the problem, contain, and the time it takes to verify. Now, the data that you see here is from a survey of international organizations from different industries. What I think is more important is when we can see this information, when we know how long it takes these 4 things to occur during a breach, we can start to parse that. We can say, are we getting faster? Did we respond to this one better than the last one? Are responses in some units slower than others? You can almost guarantee this will be the case. How does response time vary by the kind of information that was at risk? You need to really limit your urgency to data that needs to be protected. HIPAA-protected data has much larger penalties associated with it, for example, than FERPA-protected data. And what you can do with this information over time is you can start to inflect the operational costs of a data breach. Time-based metrics can enable you to do much more targeted remediation. Now, the data on here is completely representative. This is not meant to be a real university's information. But when you have, for example, there was a breach in PCI data. We knew it happened within 15 minutes. We knew what went wrong within 1 hour. We could verify everything was fixed within a day. Well, for something like that, controls might be working well. The process works. Let's stay on it. Let's make sure that it's consistent. But when it comes to other kinds of data, for example, you might see that there's a big lag between identification and knowing the root cause. Can we focus on a faster root cause analysis? What prevented us from figuring that out? For a third example, if you have just dramatically slow response, and this is not uncommon actually to have months go by before you really know what happened, you might just need significant work. Could mean process redesign, it could mean retraining for the IT staff in those units. What I want to talk about next is making risks relevant for end users. As I mentioned, I think we need to be a lot more sensitive to the idea that if we're not telling people why it matters for them, they don't have a good reason to care about information security. Good example is at the highest strategic level of the institution, the Board of Trustees and the Cabinet. And what CIOs told us again and again was that they were really struggling to keep leaders at an appropriate level, constructively engaged, informed, but not freaking out about security. And what we see far too often is represented here. Most of the time, senior leaders are relatively apathetic about information security. It's highly technical. They're not quite sure what all this stuff means. Geez, can we talk about our actual strategic priorities? But then something will happen. Maybe there's a breach down the road. Maybe there's an event that happens at an institution nearby. And suddenly there's an overreaction. I need to have the CIO in here for 10 hours on Saturday to brief everyone about what happened, stop everything. And where we want to be is that dotted orange line in the middle. We want to have a constructive engagement about security. Let's talk about how to minimize the impact of a thing that we'll know will happen. Let's talk about how to be resilient. This is a problem that was faced by the CIO at Brown University in Rhode Island. And their response, we thought, was very clever. They took these mainstream news events that were really exciting board members and cabinet members, and they converted those into an education opportunity about Brown's IT security. What does this mean? There's two representative examples of what a breach, a board education memo might look like. On the left, Target says that 70 million people were hit in a data breach. Your board members, your provost, your CBO might have read this in the Wall Street Journal. Quickly summarize what happened in the event, what vulnerability was seen. I think it was an HVAC vendor at Target that was exposed to a phishing attack. Potential impact millions in costs. They could lose customers' goodwill. They could see share prices decline, which they did very briefly. And then they pivot. What do we have at Brown University to help with this? Do we have agreements with our vendors in systems like the HVAC? Are we exposed? And a representative takeaway could be, look, we have agreements with all of our vendors in critical systems. We're not at risk for this kind of attack. We'll be happy to brief you on how we've responded, how we've checked our systems at the next board meeting, but for now, don't worry about this. A different kind of representative response might be triggered by the University of Maryland. The Chronicle covered this. Likely this was discussed in a lot of provost cabinet, in a lot of president's cabinet and board meetings. The vulnerability, there was an external collaboration website that was exposed. There could be millions in credit monitoring costs. There could be reputational damage. Of course, we're not quite sure how seriously to take some of that. But what does Brown have to protect us? We have a data destruction policy that we think is state-of-the-art. We have network monitoring to make sure that when this kind of thing happens, we're ready for it. But we could be exposed. When we've gone out to talk to department leaders and unit leaders in different research centers, and we ask them about consistent adherence to our collaboration policy, we get kind of muddy answers. We're not quite sure if we're ready for this. I'll tell you what, we're going to focus on this side of this for now. And when we come to the next board meeting, we'll tell you how we've improved. And when I asked the CIO, the CISO at Brown, how they knew this was working, they shared what I think is a good example, getting ahead of the Shellshock bug. Likely all of you will remember when Shellshock hit, or rather when it was discovered that we were vulnerable. Student Macs were vulnerable to use. This required multiple rounds of patching by central IT. In a typical situation like this, the CIO might have had to wait 60 days to brief the board on what had happened. In between then, they might have had 5 to 10 one-on-one conversations with individual board members, bringing them up to speed, a huge time suck from them when they needed to be focused on what they were doing. When they had the breach education memo, the CISO was tasked with doing all the research they could find within 24 hours. They took 45 minutes, wrote down the memo, sent it over, and that was it. The board knew what had happened. They knew why it mattered for Brown. They knew the protections that Brown had. and they knew that Brown's IT team was on it, was moving forward. And what they found is that this is getting them a lot more productive and proactive when they discuss security and IT issues. They don't have to start from zero, which is a problem that we hear a lot. They can immediately have a more informed conversation about what needs to change. If you're interested in something like a board education memo, what we've heard is that 1 per month is really pushing it in terms of frequency. Once per semester is too slow. People will stop being interested. What's key is to target them to the kinds of news that they'll be reading already, convert that interest and that excitement about an event that's already happening into a really productive education moment. The second area where I want to talk about making risk relevant is in department leadership, particularly academic and faculty leadership. And frequently we see schools relying on reach and mass marketing because frankly relevance is hard, it's expensive. Few institutions are really tailoring the education that they do for end users. We see that online training, having something on the website, sending email reminders, that's very common. These are push messages, they're going out to everyone on campus saying the same thing. It's a little bit less common to have standard training involved, and it's very uncommon to have really customized messages about why people should care. A workshop that describes why exactly this matters to you, a role-based training session. And as a result, a lot of these have very little impact. It's not necessarily relevant to the work tasks. I have 60 hours of work to do this week. Why should I take time for IT security? It's not relevant to my professional goals. I'm trying to get tenure. Why does this matter? And it's not leveraging personal networks. I'm used to listening to my dean about these kinds of issues. When I hear it from them, I'll start to pay attention. And as a result, a lot of us are stuck on the left. We're yelling at academic units to comply with basic hygiene rules when we go out and visit them, and we have that very rare, potentially very valuable face-to-face time. A lot of local check-ins are focused on messaging generic vulnerabilities. If you don't do this, the institution will be at risk. If you don't do this, all of our students, all of what we do could be in danger. Essentially, consequences described at the institutional level are way too abstract to get people's attention. And where we've seen a lot of progressive CISOs moving is to having more of a pull message. They're asking for insight into high-profile academic activities that are going on, major research initiatives, if there are folks abroad doing work, and they can focus their valuable face-to-face time, that education time, on understanding academic research and tailoring the risk message to project-specific vulnerabilities. A few quick examples. This is really about showing people that security risks are relevant to the things that you're working on right now, your life's work. If you have a federally funded study on medical device surgical impacts, you have a lot of grant funding that could be at risk if you can't protect your information. The NIH has actually in the past sometimes required payback of funds already spent. Let's talk about what you've done. You, faculty member A, do you have a data management plan? Yes. Have you done your software patching? Yes. That's great. But the vendors you're working with, you haven't really fixed their access. Let's focus in on that the next time we get together. If you have a cutting-edge textbook on interventional radiology, we've seen many, many examples of books that have been worked on for many years that end up published for free online just before the deadline. Hackers might steal a textbook and post it on the internet for free. Do you change your passwords regularly? Do you have secure data transfer? Your password's not very strong. That's where we need to focus. And it's not about scaring people. When I say threats to my life's work, that may be putting it a little bit too strongly. This isn't about an upgraded version of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. This is really about tailoring our education, tailoring our message to the things that people really care about, to the things that they're going to pay attention to, and that will have sustainable impact over time. The third big challenge that we hear our members talk about is demonstrating vulnerability, vividly showing people that it is you that is at risk, it is you that needs to care about this right now. And one of the best examples that we've seen in showing people that they're vulnerable is something that you've all likely heard about, and I know the folks at KSU are actually very good at, SelfPhishing, which can be great in theory, but potentially very distracting in practice. quick show of hands, how many institutions in the room have actually done self-phishing for their own organizations? Okay. So that's pretty common. Usually there's maybe one school in the room that's done this, and there's a pretty good reason. It can cause a lot of distraction. There can be hard feelings. If you can't manage the process really well, it can go wrong. And what I mean when I say go wrong, you might be courting a time-consuming confusion. If you're telling people that their account has been hacked, that their account verification is needed, that direct deposit update is required, if you are phishing your own constituents to try to help them see that they are vulnerable to similar messages from malicious folks, they might be reaching out to organizations all across campus, bothering them, taking up a lot of their time. They might be calling the IT help desk. They might be calling HR, the vendor. They might be worried, am I in trouble for this? And this can take a lot of time away from the campaign and start to make it potentially not worth it. The biggest lesson that we hear from people that do self-phishing is that you have to pre-wire campus. You can't treat this as a way to surprise people or to catch people off guard. This has to be treated as a really constructive education opportunity. A targeted preparation maximizes your campaign benefits. So this is an example from Eastern Michigan, but I could have pulled something similar from dozens of schools, private and public, that have done this. Prior to the campaign going live, what they'll do is message managers across campus, tell them why the campaign is happening, why it's worthwhile. They'll message users, you're being selected at random here, there's absolutely no penalties, there's nothing punitive about this. They'll call the services around campus, like the help desk, like other folks, tell them to expect a call volume to increase. It's also extremely helpful to provide them with template scripting when people have common questions. And after the go live, the person that is phished successfully is immediately replied to. They get an instant notification. It's non-punitive. You're reinforcing the policy that they apparently did not recognize, and it's linking them to trainings at the point of vulnerability. In the modern workforce, email is probably the most fundamental thing that most of us do. If you can show people that the act of emailing can have inherent risks, that can be a huge way to help them be more secure. And why do people do self-phishing? If it courts time-consuming confusion, if you have to pre-wire, it sounds like a lot of work. And the reason is it helps you move in the right direction. This is data, again, from Eastern Michigan. What they found is that students and faculty are much better prepared after being self-phished. They're more likely to be suspicious, aware of the potential of a threat, and over time, they've seen dramatic decreases in the number of accounts that were compromised. I believe that Kansas State does have a presentation on self-phishing, so I want to make a plug for them. We've been very impressed by their work here and in tracking how phishing is detrimental for campus and in giving folks on campus a really clear idea of what phishing scams actually look like. This is a sample pre-wire email or representative communication that we put together. And I've outlined the core components on either side. Real campus evidence is driving urgency. You need to be able to demonstrate why this is happening in hopefully a very simple metric. We're seeing a large increase in the incidence of new phishing attacks or compromised accounts. Here's how it will affect you. Here's the education pointers that we think are critical. Here's an explanation of the consequences, i.e. there never should be consequences for self-phishing. And here's an easy route to additional information. Self-phishing, as I mentioned, relatively rare in higher education, but a lot of other industries have really bought into this practice. There was a multinational firm that promised if they could get their self-phishing vulnerability, if they could get 5% less people clicking through self-phishing emails, they would give everyone at their company an extra day off. This amounts to $5–10 million in spend. The private sector really believes in this practice. We think that it has a lot of applicability and a lot of potential value for higher ed. The final place I want to talk about is incentives, and as I mentioned, this is somewhat of a holy grail. For CISOs, IT doesn't always have a lot of ways to tell people what to do, to force them to comply. So incentives can be a little bit controversial. But there's a good reason why we should at least have the conversation. Breach costs, the cost of what happens when you have a breach event, are almost always invisible to the end users that are involved. Almost no one is charging back what can amount to hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars in spend. And the reason is that breach charges are a cultural non-starter at a lot of schools. I heard a variation on this theme a lot. There's a part of me that says, yes, that's exactly what we need. God, let's engage the deans. They care about the budget. But I don't think it would have the intended effect. We might end up with more resentment than awareness. We found only a handful of schools that actually charged individual units partial costs of a breach. And one of the most outspoken was Jerry McCartney, the CIO and VP for IT at Purdue University. He told us that breach chargebacks are really the ultimate attention getter. And the reason that they're worth considering, even though they're going to cause potentially some heartache, some uncomfortable conversations, there's three big reasons. The first is that deans, powerful deans at large state schools, are going to listen when budget is involved. They're not going to necessarily care if the CIO is sending them angry memos. They might care, they do care about laws and regulations, but they're going to really pay attention when it comes out of their budget. Second reason, riskiest end users, particularly research faculty, listen to deans. They're going to feel very immune to consequences if it's only the CISO or the IT team sending them a message. A dean is someone they professionally cannot afford to ignore. And finally, deans talk to each other. I think too often we think about communicating IT security from the lens of IT talking to units. When we can leverage units talking to each other, the natural conversations and relationships that are happening on campus, that's where you can get much more power and much more sustainable messaging. Once the word gets out, when a dean is charged for one of these, you don't need to do additional education. That's what Jerry's found. The informal networks are far stronger in communicating than you ever could be. I asked Jerry many times for a sense of how the breach chargebacks would work. What was the calculation that went in here? And he said the first thing that actually needs to be thought through is charging only units that, quote unquote, deserve it. Sort honest mistakes, folks that are doing the wrong thing but not intentionally, from egregious behaviors. And the decision tree works like this. Can the breach be traced to a specific unit? Was one single unit responsible for the problem? If no, they're exempted from the chargeback. If you can't sort how the College of Arts and Sciences and the Cancer Research Center were both involved in the server, no one can be charged. If yes, Jerry asks, have they followed basic security protocols? Do they follow the basic hygienic behaviors? If yes, they'll be exempted. They did the best they could. We told them to follow basic hygiene, and they did it. There's no reason to charge them. But if no, he asks one more question. Is this a repeat offender? Likely all of you in the room know who the repeat offenders are on your own campuses. If they're making these kinds of mistakes over and over and over again, if the message isn't getting through by the fact that breaches and security challenges keep happening, that's where Jerry pulls the trigger and he says, that's when you're charged back for the cost of response, forensics, communication, remediation. Only when he goes through that entire process will he say, all right, that's enough, you're being charged. And what Jerry would tell you, this is not about bullying or scaring those units that are the repeat offenders. This is about engaging them and educating them about why this matters. It's about signal value, not cost recovery. Ultimately, no unit on campus, no academic unit will ever be probably an evangelist for IT security. They can be your allies, they can be your friends, but security is not their job, it's yours. You want them to focus on their mission, not cripple them by taking away their budget in a breach chargeback. And what Jerry does is he undercharges as a rule. He'll tell them the breach details, the policy, that the unit has been unresponsive, here's how to prevent it in the future, but he'll undercharge as an absolute rule. This is about signal value, not trying to get costs back. Jerry's an interesting CIO, if anyone in the room has met him. He'll give them a total charge only when they actually ask for a line item. Then he'll start to bump up the price a little bit, and there's a little bit of a surcharge for knowing the details. And with that, I think that wraps up the research that I brought about elevating security awareness. What I want to stress is that a lot of what I talked through is about engaging more constructively. I think I was talking with Floyd just before the presentation that security can be a tough topic because it feels like it never stops. It's always going on. You always have to deal with it. Units are constantly told the same things over and over again. It can be easy to feel like there's no progress to be made. And I think using some of these practices, and I would bet some of the things that you're doing on your own campus, we can be a lot more constructive. We can be a lot more creative. We can help people see that security isn't an IT problem. It's part of an enterprise process that matters to the things they care about. And with that, I'd love to take questions from the room. If we have time. I'm not sure that.
Yeah, we have a few minutes. Do you have questions? We have a little box.
Yeah, so we can get the questions on the stream, live stream. So if you have one for Ben, I'll try to toss this gently to you and catch everybody's questions.
So I'll start it out,
Sure.
Ben. Can you go back to slide 16?
Sure.
What I'm interested in is I understand, you know, the hardwiring, the response process.
Yep.
And we look at this slide that talks about, you know, we're very, to me, our security response sometimes is very, just that, it's very responsive.
Yep.
The hardwiring helps us prepare for that, certainly improves it. What would be interesting for me is what should that curve look like? I mean, when we really think about how, instead of just being reactionary, how do we start thinking about an ongoing process, not only for hardwiring our response process, but for educating, motivating, and looking at what is happening in the industry in terms of security, and what should that curve really look like for us to be continuously prepared?
Right. Well, and I think that's a very good question. I think what it boils down to is this graph essentially shows how we respond to the entire campus, how we go out and talk to every single person on campus with flyers, with sort of mass marketing tools. Ultimately, what I think this needs to look like is not a one-dimensional, here's what the campus should look like. I think every part of campus has a different appropriate engagement level for security. For folks who are in the academy, they need to be engaged at a certain level, but it shouldn't be their day jobs. For people who have FERPA or HIPAA protected data that they work with every day, they should be a notch higher. I think it's about decomposing the one-size-fits-all approach of mass marketing into what should be kind of a horizontal, layered approach that's fitted to the different kinds of data access that we have.
Questions? Okay, so I'm going to toss this to you and see if we can catch it. It won't hurt. Okay.
Thank you. So we're from K-State, and you're talking, and what my thought of self-phishing is different from what I think you are defining self-phishing as.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking of the word trickery, but that's not what you mean, right? You mean we are policing ourselves in terms of phishing. Is that what you mean?
Well, I think when I say self-phishing, what I'm referring to is someone using potentially a vendor like PhishMe or the Central IT Shop will draw up fake emails saying things like click here to process your arrays or enter your credentials here, and they'll send those out to individual pockets of campus to determine whether or not those parts of campus are at risk. A lot of people do see that as trickery. I think there's often a reaction that you've lied to me, you've attacked me, and people can feel, I think, angry, and that's a little bit of what I talked about here. I think it's not necessarily seen as trickery. The schools that can successfully pre-wire, and I think it's a lot different on different campuses when IT has different kinds of relationships with folks on campus, but schools that can pre-wire effectively, they've told me that, and the best example I've heard, a woman came up to the CISO and gave him a big hug. She had no idea that she was in danger. She just thought it was okay to put in her credentials. To her, it was a benefit. It was an amenity, almost a gift from IT, teaching her that she was at risk and she didn't know it before. But I think that requires a very, very careful and coordinated approach. Oh, okay. Got it.
Other questions or comments for Ben?
Okay, so Ben, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.